Hello there, Commodore 64 and retro enthusiasts. I would like to show you another advanced effect you can do with the Commodore 64 shoot-'em-up construction kit. This does require a bit of additional coding. I'll try and demonstrate that as clearly as possible, but first have a look at the effect in-game. So this is using the standard vertical shoot-'em-up construction kit, not that it should make much difference. And what inspired this was, I've often wanted to include enemies that have a rapid fire, like machine gun effect. The problem is, A, that causes a lot of load on the sprites, so it can cause slowdown, and B, it makes it very difficult for the player, because you can't really dodge through bullets that fire too rapidly unless they pause every now and again. And changing the firing rate of an enemy isn't something that's possible. However, I have now fixed this so it's possible to have an enemy that has rapid fire, then stops, then rapid fire again in a regular sequence. Take a look at this. Firing, stops. Firing again, stops. And it will keep on doing that. And you can see the other enemy, the red enemy, constantly firing in another direction on a lower rate, whereas the white enemy has the new alternating pattern. And this is how that was created. So, I have to go into our machine code monitor here. Now I've added new code at this address, 1600. That's in the map memory. You might not want to put it in the map memory depending on how big a game you want. If it's only a short game, I find it convenient to use the back end of the map memory to store additional routines in. However, it's usually recommended to finish your game first and then code over the editor. The editor begins at this address, actually. The editor begins at 6580. Only as soon as you start doing that, you can't use the editor anymore, so you really need to have your game in a finalized condition and then preferably save it as a finished game. Although, if it's not going to be too much code, you can still use some of the editor's features instead and then save it as a finished game later. The sprite editor, however, will be immediately lost if you start coding at that point. So since this is only a demo, I've decided to sacrifice map space. So, 1600, that's where this new routine begins. You can see that's all empty space before 1600 because that's unused map space. And this is the new routine at 1600. So, JSR 5C94, that's just to replace a line that's been overwritten. Then we have this line here, increment 18FF. Now 18FF is the timer. That is telling the white enemy whether it should be firing or whether it shouldn't be firing. And INC, increment, means it goes up by a value of 1. Then when it reaches 256, it cycles back around to 0 again, because C64 machine code only works in numbers of 0 to 255. So increment it by 1, then check its value. LDA, load accumulator, so we load the same number into the accumulator and we see whether it has reached 7F. 7F, I think that's 126 or 127. Either way, it's a number sort of halfway between 0 and 255. So that's comparing the value of this to this number here. So yeah, you have to know the number in hexadecimal code, which is a bit annoying. But if you just Google convert decimal into hex, you'll probably get a few free apps that will help you do that. That's certainly how I always do it. So you compare that number to that to see whether it's bigger than it, or is it smaller? I don't know, it doesn't make any difference really. Because that branch, BCC, branch of carry clear, that means if bigger than or if smaller than. I forget which. Doesn't really matter here. But yes, if it's one of those, then it branches ahead to 1613. Now, so we have to see what's going on at 1613. It loads the number 0 into here. And if it's the other result to that BCC instruction, it just continues on, and instead of loading 0 into 18FE, it loads 1 into 18FE. Now 18FE, which can be either 1 or 0, is simply the switch that tells the enemy whether it's firing or whether it isn't firing. So these two variables, 18FF and 18FE, those are both like the last two blocks in the map memory. So they're a fairly easy sacrifice as long as you don't expect the map to go right to the end. You can spare a screen or two, you can get a lot of extra variables from that, and for this routine we only need those two variables. So one to be the timer, and the other one to be the switch. But first of all, before we take another look at what's going on, we have to show where this is routing from, which part of the main program is actually calling this. So if we look at D4503, that is where you need to include this line, JSR to 1600, which was here. Or if you put this routine somewhere else, then you just fill that address in here instead of the 1600. So that sets up our timer and our switches that we need. But now, how to tell those what to do? So now we have to go into the place where the program actually handles all the firing for the enemies. So this is in the region of 5316. So D5316. And I've already changed the line here. So at D5316, you jump to a spare memory location, which in this case is 1619, right after all the code we just did. So let's go back there. So if we have a look at 1619, where we've added our last bit of new code, the first line, BF02,X, looks like a load of gibberish, but it isn't. All it's doing, in fact, is loading in a number which is telling us what the firing direction is. Because I only want this rapid fire effect to apply to a single fire direction, namely southeast. I want it to just run everything as normal if it's any other firing direction. So the number that corresponds to southeast is 04. If it's any other, it jumps ahead to 1625, which is JSR 5327, which is just telling the program to run a normal firing routine. Hence, the other enemy, the red enemy, will just keep firing as normal because its index number is not 04. Now, to have a look, I've got a table here which should show us the different directions that the enemies can fire in and what the numbers that correspond to those are, and I've written the numbers in hexadecimal because that makes it easier to interpret for putting them into machine code. So here we have, let's see if I can highlight some of these. 0 corresponds to no firing, 1 firing north, 2 firing northeast, 3 firing east, 4 southeast, 5 south, 6 southwest, 7 west, 8 northwest, 9 is the cross shape, the straight cross rather than the X cross, the plus sign. A is the X cross firing pattern. B is random firing. C is directional firing, and anything higher than that is not used, is just a null pattern, so we don't worry about those. But that should allow you to customize this routine for whichever firing pattern suits you best. So back to the program. So, what does it do if it does detect the southeast firing pattern? Well, in that case, it moves on. Instead of jumping ahead, it just passes over that, and it loads in 18FE, that switch we set to the timer earlier. So, it then checks if it's 1 or 0. If it isn't 0, the branch if not equal to 0 that is, it is set to 1. It jumps ahead to 1628, jumping past the instruction to run the firing routine, and for that turn it does nothing until the switch turns again, in which case it ignores that and runs the firing routine as normal. So since the switch stays off for half the timer, the firing routine is ignored and that particular enemy does absolutely nothing. Which, oops, we have a look again, allows us to have an enemy that fires rapidly, then stops, then does it again. So I'm planning to use this myself to have enemies that have a very dangerous sort of machine gun attack, but then they leave a window for you to slip through it, which makes using rapid fire a lot more attractive. It could also be used to create, say, a force field that comes on and off in regular patterns. So it's just another way to add a little variety to your SEUCK games, if that's your thing. Oh well, hope you find that useful, and bye for now.